Yeah, thank you very much for the nice introduction, and thanks for the organizers of the summer school here. For some years now, a strong politicization has been emerging in the arts. And so I would like to ask straightforwardly the question, what is political art? What do we mean when we speak of political art? What does it mean when the arts have become politicized? And what is the reason for this boom of political art in the recent years? My plan is to start with three possible definitions of political art, and my question is always how feasible or unfeasible are these definitions, and what is the cognitive power of these terms. And based on that conceptual groundwork, I will then analyze and discuss various examples of political art. The first definition for political art is always political art. The term is often used by artists who see themselves as political activists. From this perspective, the initial problem simply disappears. If art is always political art, then it makes no sense to ask how and why art is becoming highly politicized today. For our discussion, this definition of political art is an inappropriate term. My second definition is the obvious one, namely art addresses a political issue. In this sense, Van Gogh's sunflower paintings would not be political art. This notion captures all the works of art that articulate some social issue. But this commonplace notion of political art is, in my opinion, too weak. I want to suggest a strong definition of political art. Art takes sides in a political conflict. This concept includes the previous concept of political art because an artwork can only take sides in a conflict if it articulates a political conflict. The criterion is therefore stronger. The third notion of political art has two aspects. Political art articulates a political conflict, and in addition, it takes sides in this conflict. This concept of political art assumes that one cannot arbitrarily define what is political, but that the distinction between the political and the non-political is first and foremost established in the political system. Most social issues are not political issues. They must first be communicated as such in the political system. Political art can only take sides if there are political parties or at least political movements that take a contrary position with regard to this one conflict. This is a conceptual groundwork for the analysis of political art, but it is helpful to change the first definition of political art. Art is not always political art, but art can be always politicized. And here I mean art can always be interpreted or presented or framed as political art. So we have a difference between political art and politicized art. Political art is defined on the production side, and politicized art is defined on the reception side. So let's now look at different examples. And my basic example for political art is this monument to Ernst Thälmann, which has been erected in 1981 and 82 in East Berlin. And East Berlin belonged at that time to the socialist part of Germany. The monument articulates a political conflict, the conflict of the Cold War between the political systems of socialism and capitalism. And second, it takes sides in this conflict. The former leader of the German Communist Party, Ernst Thälmann, is glorified in this monument. And in addition, the leader of the East German successor party, SED, places himself in this tradition on two stales which were originally located next to the Thälmann monument. one can read, "With the shaping of socialism in the German Democratic Republic, we erect a worthy monument to Ernst Thälmann, the bold fighter for freedom, humanity, and social progress of our people." Erich Honecker. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, these inscription panels were removed because of their propagandistic message and are now on display in a city museum in Berlin. The Thälmann monument is thus our initial example of political art in the strict sense. It is obvious that it takes sides. It is like a 0 point in a coordinate system. In relation to this example of political art, in the strong sense, we can discuss other examples of political art and politicized art. To understand the phenomenon like political art means to know the different manifestations of political art. And here I follow Walter Benjamin, who said, to understand an idea is to understand its extremes. Here you can see a work with the title Safe Passage by Ai Weiwei from the year 2016. It is an installation with 14,000 life jackets, which were attached to the pillars of the Berlin Concert Hall. In the middle between the pillars hangs a lifeboat with the inscription Safe Passage. This is a clear political statement for the government's refugee policy for safe passages of refugees across the Mediterranean Sea. Here, too, a political line of conflict has already been set up by politics. The artwork forces every viewer to position himself or herself in this conflict. An immediate consequence of political art is that it exacerbates an already existing political polarization in the society. In August 2016, the right-wing identitarian movement occupied the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin and unrolled the banner "Secure Borders, Secure Future." This protest took place only half a year after Ai Weiwei's life jacket action, and the concert hall is only 1 kilometer away from the Brandenburg gates. While this protest is not directly a work of political art, the identitarian movement uses avant-garde strategies of performance art. In general, the boundaries between art and political activism are becoming blurred in political art. These two actions are each about a symbolic occupation of a building in the public space. The symbolic representation of a political conflict not only makes it more vivid and clear, but also intensifies the conflict at the same time. Let's take a second look at Ai Weiwei's work. Ai Weiwei's installation was commissioned by the Cinema for Peace Foundation for its annual benefit evening in Berlin. In 2016, the most valuable refugee film was awarded here. The red carpet was rolled out especially for the celebrities of the movie industry, for instance. And it is also part of Ai Weiwei's installation that the visitors in high heels and evening dress went under the inflatable boat through to the concert hall, as you see here. Safe passage is not only a demand for a safe passage across the Mediterranean, but at the same time shows the guests a safe way past the misery of the refugees into the festival hall. Additionally, the whole event also included an unintentional performance of all the guests. It was Ai Weiwei's idea to place a parcel with a rescue blanket under each of the chairs, which the guests would then wrap around themselves as a sign of solidarity with the refugees. Ai Weiwei then posted this photo on his Instagram. What you can see in the photo is how the stars celebrate themselves by putting on a gold cloak like a king and a queen used to do. The work does not simply take sides in a political conflict, but also holds up a mirror to those who believe they are morally on the right side. It is, so to speak, political art that does not want to be reduced to politics and does not see itself merely as part of a political movement, but also as art. It is political art that makes its political message ambivalent and thus, in a second step, transcends politics. Here you can see the memorial of the murdered Jews of Europe, or the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin for short. As a symbol of the German culture of remembrance, it is an unmistakable example of political art. And this is the so-called Bornhagen Holocaust Memorial of the Center for Political Beauty, which is a German artist and activist group founded by the artist Philipp Ruch. It is a miniature of the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. It is directly in front of the house of the leader of the AfD in the federal state of Thuringia. And the leader of this party is here Björn Höcke. The AfD is a right-wing populist party in Germany, and Höcke has called the Berlin Holocaust Memorial a monument of shame. And for this reason, the Center for Political Beauty has erected a copy of the Holocaust Memorial in the neighbor's garden. The Bornhagen project was perceived by the public less as a work of art than as a political action. But in my opinion, it is also a remarkable example of political art. The artistic nature of this political action becomes immediately clear in a video by the Center for Political Beauty, in which the group appeals for donations for the project. Here it says, "Because Höcke is a secret admirer of the monument, we are now building it right in front of his house. Watch Germany's most famous arsonist, sleep right in the house next to him, play with his sheep, invest in concrete, make the Holocaust Memorial right in front of Höcke's house possible. Donate now. Put a monument to Björn Höcke." This is not the language of politics. This is the hyper-affirmative language of art. One reason for the great upsurge of political art in recent years lies not in the art itself, but in a transformation of the political system. The old conflict between left and right is transforming into a conflict between cosmopolitans and communitarians, and is transforming in our society. Such realignment times are accompanied by great uncertainty and disorientation in the political system, because parties must develop new ideologies for new groups of voters. During this time, political activists such as the Identitarian Movement or Fridays for Future gain a special importance and take on an additional orientation function for parties that they usually do not possess. Activists have no doubts. Even in realignment times, they always have a clear political goal in mind. Here you can see the parties in Germany's political space in 2017 following different activist movements. Just as political activism gains importance during a realignment, activist art also takes an additional relevance during such times. From the perspective of the realignment theory, the Bornhagen Holocaust Memorial is not only a political action against the AfD, but it becomes a symbol of our time. The new conflict line between cosmopolitans and communitarians is essentially a conflict between globalization winners living in the metropolises and globalization losers in the provinces. And it is precisely this new political conflict that appears here as an aesthetic idea. On the one side, you can see the miniaturized copy of the Berlin Holocaust Memorial, which is an essential part of the cosmopolitan identity in Germany. And on the other side, you see a 500-year-old parsonage, a house in which for centuries the families of pastors lived, and which today is home to a right-wing politician, and in between grazes a flock of sheep. The Bonhagen Holocaust Memorial is, in my opinion, a great example of political art, but one that undoes the clear partisanship it initially suggests. Whether this interpretation corresponds to the intention of the Center for Political Beauty is difficult to say. But if an activist group works with the means of hyper-affirmation, then it must also expect to lose control over the interpretations. Such a loss of control is desirable in art, but not in politics. Here you see the Alice Salomon College of Social Work and Social Education in Berlin. Until recently, this poem by Eugen Gomringer was on the facade of the university. After student protests in 2016, the Senate of the university decided to paint over the facade and replace it with another poem. On the left side, you can see the English translation of the poem, which is originally written in Spanish. The quintessence of the poem can be found in the two final verses: avenues and flowers and women and an admirer. The poem from 1951 is an example of concrete poetry, which was essentially founded by Eugen Gomringer. The accusation against the poem was that the poem would be sexist and women would be degraded to the object of male admiration. The removal of the Gomringer poem caused heated discussions and reactions in Germany. The Minister of Culture, Monika Grütters, called it a frightening act of cultural barbarism. Another reaction came from the housing cooperative Grüne Mitte Hellersdorf, which decided to reattach the two poems to the poem to two of its facades. Here you can see the poem in two versions, in a Spanish and in a German, and it is illuminated at night. So that is a protest against the protest. The removal of this poem is an example of a political interpretation of an inherently non-political work of art. It is, of course, always possible for someone to arrive at such a far-fetched interpretation, but how can it be that an institution like a university simply adopts such a strange reading? I think one can explain this kind of contemporary iconoclasm, with the law of group polarization. Empirical studies have shown that under certain conditions, members of a group take more extreme positions after a discussion than before the discussion. Thus, a group polarization to occur, two conditions must be met. There must be a largely homogeneous value milieu, and there must be a controversy based on this value system. The first condition was fulfilled insofar as a basic feminist consensus certainly prevailed at the Alice Salomon College, found in 1908 by Alice Salomon, which was a women's rights activist. And of course, the second condition was also met insofar as a feminist-inspired discussion of the Gomringer poem took place at the university. Moreover, initially there will have been a whole spectrum of opinions on this issue, ranging from moderate to radical voices. The law of group polarization now states that under these conditions, the radical feminist position will prevail over the moderate feminist positions. Even if before the controversy, only a few group members were actually convinced that Gomringer's poem is misogynistic, As a result of the discussion, almost all group members will agree with this opinion. The mechanism behind such group polarization is, first, that more feminist arguments circulate in a feminist environment and counter-arguments are thus hardly known. And secondly, that one fears the reputational damage, and that is the most important reason, that reputational damage of arguing against the core value of the group. Here you see another example, Nicholas Galanin's work, White Noise, American Prayer Rug. The woven carpet hangs on the wall and shows an old cathode ray tube emitting only white noise. The television screen appears here as a prayer rug of the Americans. I see in this work a great allegory for the fact that the television religion of the United States no longer works. The artwork is complex and ambiguous and contains no direct political message, one could think. However, on the Flickr account of Galanin, there is a remarkable self-interpretation of this work. The artist writes, "The work points to whiteness as a construct, used throughout the world to obliterate voices and rights of cultures, regardless of complexion. Calling attention to white noise as a source of increasing intolerance and high hate in the United States, as politicians, media, and citizens attempt to mask and obliterate the reality of Americans' genocidal past and racist present." It is a political interpretation it is a political interpretation of the work that seems completely out of place. There is no information in the artwork itself that connects the white noise with the white skin. In this case, a work of art is politically framed by the artist himself. But there are some critics, however, which suggests that the text came from the curators of the Whitney Biennale 2019, where the artwork was first shown. This is another example of how art can be politicized. Today, the politicization of the arts has gone so far that even blatant political misinterpretations are now taken into account. The painter Philip Guston lived from 1913 to 1980 and became famous with such caricatures about the Ku Klux Klan. The National Gallery in Washington, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Tate Modern in London, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston had organized a major traveling exhibition for Guston in 2020. In light of Black Lives Matter, they feared accusations of giving a platform to racism and postponed the exhibition with the following justification. After a great deal of reflection and extensive consultation, our four institutions have jointly made the decision to delay our successive presentation of Philip Guston now. We are postponing the exhibition until a time at which we think that the powerful message of social justice and racial justice that is at the center of Philip Guston's work can be more clearly interpreted. In principle, this is a subjugation of the arts to the dictates of politics. It is an essential part of art that it can be interpreted, and it is characteristic of interpretations that they can be ambiguous. Philip Guston's work undoubtedly belongs to the genre of political art, but this stylistic device of caricature are just as unsuitable for unambiguous political messages as the devices of hyper-affirmation. I think Guston's paintings had more of a function of making the Ku Klux Klan issue visible and communicable in the United States of the 1960s. Perhaps this case could best be described as a politicization of inconclusive political art. There are now a vast number of examples where political considerations have strongly influenced artistic decisions. We are not just dealing with individual cases here, as we were in the past. Rather, a structural problem has emerged in recent years that I would like to call digitally amplified group polarization, or amplified group polarization for short. What you see here is a general model of an institution, such as a university or a museum or an art academy. An institution has an administration that has to make specific decisions, such as which artists to collect and which artists to show. As with normal group polarization, digitally amplified group polarization also requires a homogeneous value environment, as we discussed in relation to the Alice Solomon College. Universities and art scenes usually share a cosmopolitan value system ranging from moderate to radical positions. And there must be political activists who want to push these institutions in a certain direction. So that are the ingredients for the model. Under these conditions, sooner or later, there will be conflicts between activists groups and an administration. The administration has to represent the intrinsic values of the institution, such as the search for truth in universities or artistic freedom in the arts. Thus, decisions must be made about whether a political demand is in the institution's interest or not. Before the age of new media, administrations could easily handle such conflicts and protect the self-interests of their institutions. This was still possible even if there was group polarization within the institutions, for example, a large group of employees taking an activist position. This could happen. In the digital age, this becomes more difficult. Although, for example, the concept of microaggression is certainly not compatible with the idea of artistic freedom, hardly anyone in an art institution will say this openly today. People have become cautious because there is a danger of being branded as a racist, a fascist, a misogynist on Twitter and Facebook for such arguments. Even if no one seriously believes these accusations, most of which are made anonymously, the fear of reputational damage is great. And the fear of reputational damage is, as already mentioned, the main reason for group polarization. This creates a positive feedback loop in the institutions, as a result of which group polarization now extends to the administration. Instead of being able to decide on the appropriateness of a political demand, administrators are now drawn into the political discussion themselves. In other words, they lose their political neutrality to do their job. Digital amplified group polarization can thus lead to the politicization of entire institutions. In extreme cases, such institutions can then become dysfunctional, which in relation to the arts would mean that artistic points of view become subordinate to political goals. Though my thesis is that there is a structural conflict between the spheres of art and politics. The autonomy of art, as it was won by the avant-garde, can no longer be taken for granted. In this respect, my last example concerns the relationship between art and politics as a whole. We can see here Jonathan Mese at a theater performance in Mannheim 2013. Part of this performance was that the artist here shows a Hitler salute and a swastika, whereupon he was charged with a lawsuit. Paragraph 86A of the German Penal Code criminalizes the use of symbols of unconstitutional organizations, and this includes, first and foremost, Nazi symbols. Later, the prosecutor stopped the investigation against Mese on the grounds that in this case, the limits of artistic freedom were not exceeded. In the German Constitution, the freedom of art is guaranteed in Article 5, paragraph 3, with the words, "Art and science, research and teaching are free." What makes the performance by Mesa remarkable is that with it, the freedom of art was confirmed by a court order. And this freedom of art consists, first of all, in a freedom from political constraints and the freedom to use all available signs and symbols for artistic expression, no matter how this is interpreted and judged by other people. Political art in this case, one could say, becomes an art of counter-politicization. This brings me to the end of my lecture. My main aim was to analyze the phenomenon of political art with the help of a constellation of examples. On the one hand, it should become clear that there are different variants of political art and politicized art. And on the other hand, that there are two mechanisms of politicization of the arts. First, it is a consequence of a political realignment that takes place today in the society. And on the other hand, this is a consequence of the digital revolution, which leads to the new phenomenon of amplified group polarization. Both processes will have an impact on the art system in the coming years. One must even reckon with art institutions collapsing under these circumstances. And one final remark. I would like to point you to this essay in Letter International, in which I analyze in detail most of the examples discussed here, and you can find the PDF of this essay in the summer school materials. Thank you very much.